What Happened on Saltwell Hill is brought to you by Rapid Answers. On the 7th of January, 1949, Tommy Vandiver and his new wife, Beatrice, were seen walking up Saltwell Hill towards the home they were living in at the time. This was the last anyone ever saw of Tommy, Beatrice, or her 17-year-old daughter, Wanda. What happened to the family of three? Well, that remains a mystery even now, over 70 years later. In this podcast, we'll explore the events surrounding this story, the people involved, and what the families, community, and public opinion believes happened on Saltwell Hill.
When they bought that old place, Tom was lazy. He didn't like to work at all. And they brought what little furniture they had to put in that old, we call it smokehouse. And they had a little red wagon. And every once in a while they'd stop at their little red wagon and haul something up that hill home. That's how they moved.
This is What Happened on Saltwell Hill. And I'm Roger Hunter. I'll be your host and storyteller. I'd like to welcome you to episode number 2, Setting the Stage. If you haven't listened to episode number 1, I recommend you start there. And if you have already listened to episode 1, thank you for coming back. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into who the players are and how they became involved in our story. I would like to thank my good friend Gerald Hughes. You heard from him at the beginning of this episode. I'd like to thank him for taking the time on so many occasions to sit and talk with me on his front porch. And you'll be hearing from him periodically as we learn more about what happened on Saltwell Hill. In August of 1948, 30-year-old Tommy R. Vandiver married 42-year-old Elizabeth B. Johnson, also known as B or Beatrice. From all accounts, Tommy was a simple man. He had grown up in a small cabin located not too far from Saltwell Hill. He was drafted into the U.S. Cavalry in 1937. This is 92-year-old Eddie Hammond reminiscing about Tommy.
Because his stepfather had a team of horses. He came home on furlough and he had them old army boots on with big spurs on them. He got on one of them horses, and I believe that horse owed him 20 foot when he stuck that spur to him.
The stories vary depending on the source that you might want to believe. Some sources say Tommy was injured in World War II, and he was a veteran and was receiving compensation from the military for his injury. Other accounts say he was unemployed and on unemployment, though no one offers where he had been working. And still others say he was selling moonshine. And while we'll never know for sure, what we do know is that in August of 1948, he purchased a 10-acre parcel of land on tax sale for $800. It was accessed by going up Saltwell Hill, then down into the adjacent valley. This area is now dense woods, but if you know what you're looking for, you can find the foundation and other signs of human activity.
Some people by the name of Belcher, in fact, he was Dad's first cousin, owned that old place down there where Tommy ended up. And it was just an old log house. And he had, I've tried to count another, I think 8 or 9 kids in that little 3-room house. And when he got killed in a logging accident, she was pregnant again. And they lived in that little house. And his son stopped here, well, he's dead now, but he stopped here one time and talked to me. He said, if Dad wouldn't have got killed, we'd starve to death. Because we was going hungry. He said they wouldn't have stopped having kids.
Tommy grew up on the next farm over in a small 3-room cabin. While it's only a ruin today, the structure still stands.
Oh yeah, I know Tommy about on the rock. Mm-hmm. You know what that old house you went to is where his stepfather and his mother lived. And
okay, the one that's still there, yeah.
And they had Lester and Sarah and Novi and Marie. Seems like there's another one. They all lived in that little house.
Really? It's like a two-room house.
Well, there was one room that's fallen down. It was 3 rooms.
It was 3 rooms then? Okay. Yeah, it's a two-room shack right now.
And those girls, Sarah wasn't very pretty, but the others were beautiful.
B was from nearby Huntingburg, Indiana. She had 4 kids from a previous marriage. Her daughter, Wanda, who came to live with Tommy and B, she was the oldest at 16. And then she had 3 younger boys who stayed with their father, Basil Johnson, in Huntingburg. B, Tommy, and Wanda moved into the small 3-room home in August of 1948.
They'd come here to visit Mom once in a while. She said that she always felt uncomfortable when they'd come, but she'd pick some popcorn or something. They'd stay for a little while and they'd leave, and said she was always so glad when they'd leave.
It wasn't long before they met the neighbor, William, Bill, Desi Mesmore. Bill had a home that sat all the way on top of Saltwell Hill. Bill Mesmore was from nearby Louisville and was an equipment salesman. He had purchased the 20-acre farm in April of 1947. It had a small 4-room cabin sitting on it.
Messmore's house, that was there when he bought the land, right?
Yes.
Did the Browns live up there? Or
They
who
lived
lived
Brown.
Okay, so they did live up there. And they primarily, they didn't really have a car, did they? From what I've heard, they rode horse wagons.
He walked most of the places.
Okay.
Every Saturday. Now back then, you traded. You didn't buy groceries, you traded. He'd catch chicken, tie its legs, I can just see him now, and put it in a basket, and he always walked with his head down. Every once in a while he'd look up, and he'd take that chicken up to Mifflin, and he'd sell it to them, well they'd buy it, and then he'd spend that in groceries. And he'd go back up the hill with just a few groceries. He wasn't a very friendly man.
It was actually Bill's mother, Doshi, that purchased the property from Brown, who had at one time owned over 100 acres around Saltwell Hill. Bill fell in love with the property, and he called it his place to get away.
He'd taken when you entered his property, there's a big old white oak tree. I think the tree's still standing. And he'd made him a description of his property, and he'd put it in glass that said farm home of William Desi Mesmore, and he described his property.
Gerald grew up in a home at the bottom of Saltwell Hill with his mother, Nellie, and his father, Arnold. Nellie, interestingly enough, was the last person to ever see the family. Mesmore kept mostly to himself. He'd come and go at strange hours, and sometimes he'd be gone for weeks at a time. It should be noted that Mesmore did have a hunting dog up on Saltwell Hill.
He had coon dog. He called them coon dogs. One was kind of, I think we call it a blue tick hound,
Okay.
and the other was just kind of a dog.
Uh-huh.
But they would treat coons. Long before this happened, me and Joe were one night at coon hunting, and we caught 2 coons right close to the edge of that cliff up there.
What Happened on Saltwell Hill is written, hosted, produced, and sponsored by me, Roger Hunter. I put together this podcast to bring some attention to the Vandiver story, but putting together a startup podcast takes time and has expenses, and, well, it doesn't pay very good. My day job is providing life insurance for families across the United States. If you'd like to see what coverage options are for you to protect your family and help support the podcast in doing so, please go to my website at www.rapidanswers.life and complete the questionnaire to get your free, no obligation life insurance quote. That's www.rapidanswers.life. One particular encounter with Bill stands out in Gerald's mind. I had read about this in my research, but was excited to see it come out on tape.
Well, he parked right on up there, had an old Model A, and I asked him one day, I said, Bill, I need my sister needs a bicycle. Do you know where I can find one? He said, I've got one. And I walked up there with him, and that's the day he showed me the wheelbarrow he was making, and he showed me all around the stuff that he'd made, and he wanted $10 for the bike, I think 10, and I offered him 8 or 9, but he wouldn't take it. But my friend that said he went with me, I don't remember who went with me, he said, you bought the bike, but I didn't. I'm almost sure I didn't buy the bike. But he did have a bike that I'm sure he'd stolen. He said, I need money. He said, I don't have money for groceries, and I need everything I can get.
In the fall of 1948, Bill brought home a potbelly stove that he had purchased from his employer, and he gave it to the Vandivers to help heat their home and to give them some place where B could cook. That fall, the then 17-year-old Wanda and 30-year-old Bill Messmore started getting closer and taking a liking to each other. By all accounts, it wasn't long before Wanda moved into Bill's home on top of Saltwell Hill. Some stories say that he even got her pregnant. Then, in early December, Tommy and B walked into English, the county seat of Crawford County, and about 12 miles from their farm, to visit with his mother. When they returned to their farm the following day, they found that the house had burned overnight and they had lost everything. The only thing left, ironically, was the potbelly stove that Bill had brought for them a couple of months earlier. With nowhere else to go, Tommy and B moved into Messmore's home with Bill and Wanda. As the story goes, Bill helped them move the stove into his home. B was to do all the cooking and cleaning. Tommy was to take care of the chickens. And Wanda did what Wanda did. The local people took up donations of clothing and other items to help the Vandivers get back on their feet. Bill hired a guy to do some work around the house, and he started by pulling up the old linoleum floors to be replaced. Incidentally, there is another person who is believed to have spent some time up on Saltwell Hill around the time of the disappearance. In 1949, no one put the disappearances together, but many years later, a letter was sent to Sheriff Pete Eastridge. The person says their name is Lana Hall. She says she grew up in Mifflin, Indiana, and in 1983, she was living in Brazil, Indiana. She stated that her sister, Martha Lee Longest, who had in 1949 been 24 years old, moved out of the family home sometime in late 1948. They had no idea where she had gone, but she sent letters a couple times a month up until January 1949. And after that, they never heard anything from her again. Martha's father was a cousin of Tommy's, so she was known to visit them, and she was reportedly even seen in town with the Vandivers a couple weeks before they went missing. Now, I know it'll be difficult to ever prove that she was on Saltwell Hill or that she had any connection to this case, but the similar timelines make it very interesting, to say the least. So I'm asking if anyone out there has any information about the whereabouts of a Martha Lee Longest from Mifflin, Indiana, or where she may have gone, to please send me an email to whathappened@saltwellhill.com. If she's still alive today, she'd be approximately 98 years old at the time of this podcast. So while we don't expect to find her, we may find someone who knew her, maybe a child or a grandchild or someone who heard her tell stories about growing up in Mifflin, Indiana. We don't know. But we hope to find someone who can help us to clear this up. Now, by the way, Eddie Hammond, who you heard from earlier, lived a short distance away from Messmore, and he was also known to visit with the Vandivers, along with a cousin of Gerald's, we're going to call Bob Hughes. And that's where things were on January 7th, 1949, when Nellie Hughes saw the Vandivers walk up Saltwell Hill for the last time.
They walked up Saltwell Hill after going to get the mail. And was it you or your brother or your dad? Who saw them?
Mom.
Your mom was the last person to see them.
Went right by here and never saw him again.
Was it all three of them or just
him and her?
Just him and her. So Wanda wasn't with them.
Well, that's about it for episode 2. I want to thank Gerald for sharing so much with us, and you will be hearing from him again on later episodes. I do hope you're enjoying the podcast. If so, please share and comment, and please invite anyone you know who you think would enjoy our story. On episode 3, we'll explore what happened in the days and weeks after the disappearance. Now, here's where our story is going to get a little strange, and we look forward to sharing that with you next week when we look further into what happened on Saltwell Hill. What Happened on Saltwell Hill is brought to you by Rapid Answers, life insurance made simple. To help support our podcast, go to www.rapidanswers.life and complete the simple profile to receive your free, no-obligation quote. If you'd like to learn more about working with Rapid Answers, click on the career opportunities at the bottom of the page. That's www.rapidanswers.life. Hey, Roger sneaking back in here for a little prelude for what to expect in episode 3. I'll read you a short news article from June 22nd, 1933 in the Owensboro Messenger Inquirer. It says, "Youth shoots way to freedom, arrested later." Louisville, Kentucky, June 22nd, after shooting his way out of custody of 2 detectives who had arrested him as a robbery suspect, a youth registered as William Colgate, 16, was rearrested here yesterday after a chase in which approximately 20 officers took part. He was slated on charges of shooting at without wounding and robbery. Police said he admitted he held up Ernest Howard, 44, Tuesday night and took $4.95 and a watch. See you in episode 3.